This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
What if you had such a clear understanding of your own DNA and genetic makeup that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with the specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the power and capability to purchase products that best align to your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA collection kit and Endo Decoded report at endodna.com/product and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/product and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Erai Beckman. He's the founder of Mr. Cannabis brand. Erai Beckman, what's going on, man?
Everything, Kevin. How are you today, man?
I'm doing good. I'm interested in everything. I know there's a lot going on. You're blowing off some steam with your family in Costa Rica. You showed me before we were recording that it looks like you have a lovely view. It's like you have a tree, like in a tree view almost. So, congrats on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Yeah, we're at we call it the end of the world.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. It's a good time to get away too, because if in fact we do happen to go back into lockdowns or whatever, you're in a place where it doesn't matter. You can actually go outside and enjoy yourself. So, well played, my man. Well played. So, Erai, let's talk. Let's get into it. Before we really get into it, let's first let the audience get a sense of you and your background. So, I mentioned also known as Mr. Cannabis. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your days in Brazil and the impact you made within the cannabis, the pharmaceutical cannabis and CBD space there, and how you got that nickname?
Rock and roll. Sounds like a good place to start. Well, originally I was a health entrepreneur and I had done some stuff in health publishing. And in about 2014, I sold one of my businesses and a friend called me up to tell me about this miracle thing called CBD. And this previous health company I was working with some of the top doctors and scientists in the English speaking world, colleges, universities, and I'd never heard of it actually. This is in the spring of 2014. And I'm like, dude, slow down, man. Nothing does all those things. Like, just don't get ahead of yourself, because I didn't want my friend to be conned into this thing. He was telling me it helps everything. It's a miracle. I'm like, well, I'm open-minded, but I'm like, just be careful. Cause a lot of times people tell you stuff and it's not all true.
Right.
So I was
like it's too good to be true almost, right? You're like, wait.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm like, bro, I'm pretty sure I would have heard of that. Like, don't get me wrong. I might not have. I'm open to it.
Right.
So I was living in Rio de Janeiro at the time with my wife, on Copacabana Beach. It's pretty rad.
You're just like a world traveler, man. I love it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, baby. You got to get out. You got to live. You got to see the world if you're going to broaden your horizons.
That's right. Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's all good. So he said, well, listen, there's this patent. I want you to read about it. Could you fly into San Diego and at least help me out? Because he had secured a pretty big budget and he really wanted to make sure that he sold it well online. And I was pretty sure it was just going to be like a wasted trip, but he was a good friend of mine. We partied quite a bit together.
Right.
We had just gotten off a mushroom trip in Costa Rica and I was like, okay, this dude's cool.
You connected that way. Okay. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you trip with someone, it's like, all right, we get it. I see you, bro. I see you. Yeah.
We were like, we're singing in the jungle. So I'm like, I'm coming. And so he sent me this NIH at that time, this patent that they had filed on CBD, and I read it on the flight. And I was like, holy shit, this looks really legit. Like, wow, this is amazing. And it took me it was a pretty cool story of how the CBD and the cannabis industry first came to my life, because I traveled for about something like 23 hours to get to San Diego. I was one flight connection, something, it was taking longer than it was expected. And I got there, went to sleep, came into the office. 30 minutes after getting into the office, just having arrived from Brazil in San Diego, they said, "Hey, you just got here from Brazil, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "We have a call with someone who's calling in from Brazil. No one speaks Portuguese here. And I think she was ordering our product into Brazil, and she's being charged with illegal drug trafficking."
Whoa.
And I was like, whoa, okay, well, they're like, come on in, come on in. And I just I had like goosebumps at that time. I was like, wow, like, what are the chances? I just traveled halfway around the world
To connect with someone right at the same place you left, right? Like
from Brazil. I was like, that's a little, like sometimes in life you get these sort of like things that wake you up,
Right.
that shake you out of the day to day.
Mhm.
And if you, in my opinion, and some people can think this is crazy or not, but like as an entrepreneur for myself, I pay attention to those synergies, things that give you goosebumps, things that where the whole time stops.
Right.
And for some reason, you're very much aware of that particular moment. And long story short, I spoke to a woman who was, she had an epileptic daughter. It was very much like, imagine the story of Charlotte's Web, which I'm sure you've heard about, with the Stanley brothers in the United States, and
Yep.
and the doctor that covered that in that documentary film initially back in 2014.
Sure.
It was the exact same thing was going on in Brazil. So this woman had a 4-year-old daughter, severe epilepsy. She'd been ordering a CBD product, and it was working. Was actually saving her life. Nothing had worked prior to. The doctor was like, couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
It didn't work right away. It took about 9 weeks. And then one day she's waiting for this package to arrive in the mail, and who should be greeting her but the Brazilian, like DEA, basically. It's called something different, but
oh
and
my gosh.
These Latin American police, they don't fuck around. Like, they roll up to your house and
Sure.
they've got,
They kick down the doors and shit, right? I mean, they're looking for you.
Luckily that didn't happen to her, but like, they've got, rifles, and they're like, "You were arrested for international drug trafficking."
Jeez. All because it was medicine for her daughter.
Yeah. Now, technically, under the laws of Brazil at that time, that was the case. And so I'm really abbreviating a long story for you, but that was the beginning of an event where I decided to work.
What was your role in that? What was your role in that event? Like, were you translating and helping like communicate for that woman? Like, you were pulled in. Is that the role you played? And you kind of opened your eyes, or?
Yeah. So at that first call, I was just translating, and I spoke really horrible Brazilian Portuguese. Like, I barely spoke Portuguese. It was pathetic. I was basically like, "I think I understand what you're saying," but she was so grateful to just be talking to anyone, right? As you can imagine.
Sure.
And long story short, to really summarize the story, because this is a big story of how I got the name Mr. Cannabis. It went on for more than a year, but long story short, I got my wife on the phone with her, who was in Rio at the time. Ended up flying my wife out. I was like, "Listen, the CBD thing looks like it's a real deal." I got my wife to fly down to Brazil and open up a conversation with the equivalent of the National Institute of Health in Brazil.
Wow.
And I presented to them the very document that I read on the plane ride over from the National Institute of Health in the United States. And we were like, "Look, this is ridiculous. You don't need to be arresting this woman or other people. It's just, it's hemp. That can't get, if you ate enough of it, maybe it could get you high. But basically it's like hemp oil, and there should be no reason." And I said, "Let us work with you, and we will help you start the very first company ever that does this." And they were down. And so my wife and I started the very first ever pharmaceutical CBD company at that time in all of Latin America. In 2014, I believe it was officially May when we founded it. I think we were like the 5th company in the world that I knew of. And it was a whirlwind from there, brother. But essentially we started importing it. We were making headlines. We got the second most publicity in the whole country of Brazil in 2014, next to only the World Cup that was happening that year.
What did the I guess process of following regulatory compliance and working with the government of Brazil to get to a point where you were able to operate a business? I would imagine that there was lots of back and forth discussions at that time, right? Especially being so early in 2014.
Yeah, it was, like, to all the entrepreneurs, I think people in the industry listen to your podcast, right? obviously.
I hope so. Yeah, I would think so. Yes.
Yeah. So to all the entrepreneurs that are out there listening right now, you never know what's going to work, but just listen to your heart, listen to your intuition, whatever you call it. I basically said like, holy fuck, how are we going to do this? This is unreal. This is like this is a pretty it's almost about a 200 million person country at that time.
Right. That's like, yeah, you're biting off a lot at that point, right? Yeah, it's a big undertaking.
Yeah. So I have my own relationship with what I call the divine. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. And so I said to God, I'm like, holy shit, like there's a lot of people that need help. Over the coming days and weeks and months, this woman would introduce us to more and more and more parents whose kids were dying, like literally terminally ill from epilepsy. So it was like urgent.
Sure.
And essentially I got a vision of what to do. I was shown sort of some things to do. I went ahead and did them. They worked. And the story goes,
Shown a vision. Were you tripping, or was this just in a natural
no, just
state?
conscious. This is my own relationship with the divine. Like I ask
Wow.
questions. Yeah, like I meditate every day, and then I ask questions. I'm like, what should I do? And I get an inspiration. It shows me something. If it's God, the universe, nature, I don't know. And if it feels inspiring to me, like I'm like, oh yeah, that's a rad idea. I act on it. And generally, I don't know if it's because I'm having fun along the way or if it was a good idea. It generally works.
See,
So
that's interesting because I don't know if it's similar, but like I'm very like a goal oriented person, right? So if I want something to happen or I want to be somewhere, I kind of like see it playing out of what I need to do. And then I don't think about that anymore. And then I just do it. I almost like, I want to see where I'm at the end, and then the steps that take there. And then once that's kind of envisioned, it's like, okay, go to work time. And
yeah, you're seeing it in your mind.
yeah,
You probably feel, pumped on it. And then you're taking action on it.
exactly. So it's probably not the same as you, because it sounds like you're actually having like visions, but anyway, that's interesting. Okay, so then you knew that was your calling, right? You knew that you were making a huge impact on people's lives because it was beneficial to their health and well-being. So once you were successfully launched and operating in Brazil as the first company in Latin America, and I think you said fifth in the world, what then? What next?
So it was quite a bit of work. We were working with the government. They granted us permission to import it. A lot was happening. The World Cup was happening at the same time. And we needed to keep constantly pushing forward with the government. And shit would happen where you're sending packages, it's legal, but then they would still block it because it was technically, it's a big country and it's a second world country. I don't wish to offend anyone who's Brazilian. I want to say second, something like that, a developing country. So it takes a long time to disseminate information throughout an enormous country. So a package would go somewhere, it would get let through to the person because they had a prescription from their doctor. In other places it wouldn't, but we had to meet with like FedEx Bro. We had to meet with essentially the DEA multiple times. We had to meet with doctors and scientists. We had to meet with politicians. We were lobbying. We became lobbyists. We helped sponsor legislation. We helped sponsor studies. In about 9 months' time, though, we actually worked to help write legislation. And this is where I got the nickname Mr. Cannabis. And in the legislation we wrote it for both THC and CBD, because their doctors in that country, in my opinion, have a soul. They're not completely and totally bought out to big pharma. And they were like, well, if we're gonna recognize the medicinal properties of CBD and hemp, that weed, it's the same plant. So we actually wrote a bill to legalize both medically for the whole country, 200 million people.
That's a huge win right there. Yeah.
Right. That's where I got the nickname. So, and then January 15th, 2015, they passed the bill medically legalizing both weed and CBD for all of Brazil.
Wow. And before then, like obviously medicinal and of course recreational was like unheard of, right? It was illegal. Unheard of. Yeah. So it was like just basically opening the floodgates of this brand new therapeutic property or product, right? I mean, that's
everywhere.
Amazing.
And it's hard for you to relate to it growing up in North America. It was for me too. But just so you can relate, in Brazil and most of Latin America, they have people socially conditioned here. Weed's not just like, when we grew up, it was like the kids in the ads and the commercials are forgetting their wallet, don't be that kid, It's a gateway drug, right?
Yeah. Like the girl's
In
deflated in like a couch. She looks like a blow up doll or something. It looks really weird. Like she's
Yeah,
lazy and
and
yeah.
yeah, and there's not necessarily, it's not all untrue necessarily, right? Like I can't remember half my high school, right? Like in all fairness, so there was, it's not all a lie. But in Brazil, in Latin America, and still to this date in a lot of these countries, they have them basically associating weed with like crack cocaine.
Wow. Well, I
For
mean,
real.
that's how it's listed within the US government, but they actually treat it like as if that's the effects that one would get, or the addictive properties that you'd get from crack cocaine. Or what do you mean by that exactly?
I mean, like socially, like the stigma, like if you were smoking weed and if you were caught doing weed and like that, it wasn't like, oh, you're a cool hippie, you're letting loose in Latin America. Because you were saying, wow, that's a big undertaking.
Sure.
It was like taking a group of people who were raised to believe it's like crack.
Wow, that's crazy. So
it's a little,
that's a complete 180 then, right? Because you're talking about pharmaceutical medicinal properties. So what was the education barrier like at that time?
well, it was really easy, actually. A lot of the doctors and scientists, when I presented them the research that the National Institute of Health had in the United States. So in the world of pharma, if we had visuals, it would be a little bit of an easier educational process. But the bigger the country, the more studies they're doing, the more drugs they sell, the more data they have when it comes to drugs they're selling, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
So in the United States is sort of looked at as one of the foremost leaders of scientific stuff in the pharmaceutical industry. So if they had something where the National Institute of Health in the United States said, hey, we think there's value here, a lot of the other governments in the world are just going to kind of go by default, well, they've done way more research than we could ever afford to. Like they're like the top, right? So if they're doing it, we could probably do it. We'll look into it. And so when we presented them with that document, they're like, well, holy shit, if they already see this much value, we don't have anything more to do here. Let's look into it. And it actually turns out that what was interesting was Brazil had actually done the very first ever study on CBD recorded anywhere. In the 60s. So they had some pride there. Later on, a few years later in Israel, this dude named Meshulam did, he believes that he isolated the THC molecule, the one that gets us high. And he's famous for naming it like Ananda, which is Sanskrit from India for joy or bliss. And so he called it the bliss molecule. And so they had some history there, but they were really open to receiving it. And what was really cool about Brazil, a lot of people don't know this, I learned it myself, was, how you live in the United States, yeah?
Yes, Dallas.
Yeah. So in the United States, you have like your amendments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, Fourth. Do you know what your First Amendment is?
Isn't it speech? Freedom of speech?
Right to freedom of speech. And second,
right to bear arms.
You get to carry a gun.
Yep.
Right? Because you're in Texas, right? So
right.
Guns, right? In Brazil, number one, their most important thing in their constitution is the right to free healthcare.
That makes a lot of sense. I do like freedom of speech, although we can get to that because we're not quite there anymore. But yeah, freedom to health, that makes a lot of sense. Right? I mean, every living human being should have access to some sort of healthcare.
Yeah, hell yeah. And so for them, this is what was really interesting. I'll now that I've laid that path, that stone on the path, let's go to the second one. So when I went to them and I told these judges, listen, these kids that are still dying right now from epilepsy, seizure-related conditions, they've tried everything their doctors have currently prescribed to them. So according to your constitution, if you don't let them try CBD and they fucking die, it's on you.
Yeah, you use the policy against them, which is very smart. I mean, that's number one, right? So we have proven that there is medicinal value with CBD. Therefore, by you holding that from them and not allowing them to access it, you're then violating their constitutional rights.
In Brazilian law, if that judge withheld them from trying that medicine because they'd exhausted every other thing that was legally available to them and they were still dying. If the judge prevented them from trying this other thing, what the hell's the harm? They're already dying. Mm-hmm. They tried everything available that you've already approved. But if they died, that judge could be charged with murder.
Wow. So then their hand was forced. So what was the outcome? Was there like overnight success that they saw
No,
with?
no, it was like one person at a time. So they're like, okay, well, you've got a good point. This first girl of that first mom I spoke with
Yeah.
was allowed to have it. She was let off. We're kind of flip flopping around the story right now, but originally she was allowed to have it. That spun this thing where, without getting, I didn't know how much you wanted to cover of just the beginning of my story, but there was a lot involved. We rallied associations of other parents with other kids. I actually paid. This is going into a book. I'm writing a book right now. It's called Legalizing a Nation: How I Became Mr. Cannabis. It should be ready for publication and distribution this year. But I actually paid journalists to go down to these protests and cover these parents so it would make it on the news that night. Right.
Wow.
And that's the same shit that's happening in the United States. People are
I was
like,
just gonna say, it's same thing that mainstream media does. that's
yeah.
that's so wow. Okay. So that's pretty incredible story, man. That's a whole movement that jump started in a country. And so what was the reaction once kind of everything was settled and in place? Like, and then tell us about kind of what your next focus was after the Brazilian market.
Yeah. So to be clear, it wasn't just me. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was my lovely wife as well, Kailea. If she's watching this, she's a rock star. Without
Shout
her,
out to
none of that would have been
Kailea.
possible. Shout out to Kailea, who wishes to be here, but she's with the Munchkins. So we were completely burned out at the end. We did about 8-9 months of 10, 12-hour days, 7 days a week, traveling back and forth nonstop, got it legalized. We were pregnant. We got pregnant with our first child. My wife was pregnant in January, and we just decided to take a small semi-retirement because we were completely burnt out. We were just exhausted, and the project was going well, and we had managed to shift the legislation in the country. And so I wasn't from the pharmaceutical industry, to be totally clear. I don't have a medical background. I'm just an entrepreneur. I had seen the opportunity to help get this plant medicine into this country, and so I formed a pharmaceutical company. But in my little stint in getting to hang out with doctors and scientists and people from the pharmaceutical world and politicians, I realized really quickly, like when we got CBD approved to be imported into the country of Brazil, we didn't do it as a synthetic altered thing. It was actually the whole plant oil, right? Totally natural, just the way nature intended. There was very little to no negative side effects from it. Okay, it basically doesn't do any harm. It really only had benefits. And so after that little stint, I was like, holy shit, I could completely see what I just, was one of the first people starting. There's other companies back then too, that I'm sure in the pharmaceutical side of making these synthetics did far more than I did. But I could see the future of science going in the direction of using weed and CBD in things like drugs, but maybe ideally drugs that are healthier for you, if you will. And so I had a little bit of money, made a little bit of money, and I decided to hire some chemists. So chemists are the guys that make drugs in pharma. And I decided to hire them. And I essentially went to them. I said, listen, a lot of these drugs, I know a lot of people are really, a lot of people shit all over the pharma industry and signed, like they don't have our best interests at heart. Now, in all fairness, there's quite a bit of money to be made there. So it's not impossible. There could be some corruption. And I don't want to say too much because I don't know where you're putting this podcast. I don't want it to get censored. But the fact of the matter is, it costs so much money to get a drug that you've patented through all the studies to where it can actually get approved. It sometimes can be like billions of dollars.
Right.
That, billions of dollars, moral, human ethics and integrity. Sometimes with billions of dollars, that line can move around a little bit, to put it politely. And there have been times where I know that some of these things, because they have to patent them so that they can invest the money in, so that they own it completely just to get the drug being able to prescribe, they have to be synthetic. And oftentimes these synthetic things, they work great for a certain percentage of the population. They don't work at all for some people, just nothing, right? Some people, they can actually have way worse negative side effects than the thing you're trying to help in the first place. I'm sure you know of that, right? And so when I went to these chemists, made a little bit of money, just done something in pharma, I said, hey, what is, like, if you had to do everything all over again, like what would be a drug, right, that was good for you, that actually addressed the root problem? Because a lot of the drugs in the pharmaceutical industry, they're kind of like Band-Aids, oh, you have high cholesterol. The patient's like, does it have anything to do with my diet and exercise? don't worry about it. I have a pill for that, right? It's not really helping. It's just sort of like masking over. It's like there's like a light going on in your car dash, like check engine, and you're just like putting a sticker over it. Like, does
Right.
that really solve the problem? Or
Right. Like
it's
managing the condition rather than like trying to address it. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty insane. And if you spoke to a lot of doctors individually, they'd probably admit it to you. But they're busy. They've got families. They've got bills to pay. They've just spent 15 years getting their degree and starting a practice. It's really tough to try and change that whole system, which has essentially become a disease management for profit system. It's kind of what it is by and large.
Right. So you asked these chemists, you said what would be the one drug that you would develop?
No, so I said, like, so first of all, is there such a thing as drugs that we could make that are like good for you, that have little to no negative side effects, and that would actually address the root cause?
Right.
Like, what is that? I'm not a scientist. I'm not a chemist. I have no
What'd
idea.
they
I'm just not.
say?
So they told me about this was in 2015. The few of the chemists I spoke with said nootropics, which you've heard of a lot now, 6 years later in 2021, probably.
A little bit of it. Not I don't know much about it, to be honest with you. What are nootropics?
No big deal. So everyone's got their own definition, but by definition, it's sort of like something that's going to give you positive benefit without having any negative downside. Okay. It can be like a whole thing, like an organic, real natural ingredient. It could also include some synthetic ingredients. And so basically they were like, listen, we could probably, if we really had to, if we could do it all over again, if we, like, all of our dreams were coming true, we'd love to work on drugs that are kind of more like supplements, that are in the form of nootropics, that hopefully address the real underlying cause of, let's say, things like, why you're not having good sleep, or why you're actually experiencing anxiety, or why you really might feel stressed out, or why you might actually be feeling foggy minded, to help you feel clear. And it was a really cool concept. In the simplest way I can explain it is, ideally, like, if I'm going to give you a supplement that you're going to pay money for, you kind of want to feel something right away, right? But I personally don't want to give you something that's not actually going to help you in a meaningful way within yourself. And the longer you take it, hopefully it's going to help you a lot more. Am I explaining that well enough? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, what you're saying is you want to take something that won't have like make you feel groggy or have kind of any added side effects that and gets to the root of the problem. So like something that
Yeah.
yeah, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Like, what I'm trying to say is, like, let's say like you feel brain fog, because, as an example, not you particularly, but as an example, someone listening to this,
Right.
really, they haven't been eating the best diet. Maybe they've been hitting McDonald's and the fast food drive through way more than they should. They're probably not training enough. They're probably stressed out. They're not getting enough sleep. They're binging Netflix late at night.
Right.
It's a
All the
culminant.
recipe, everything for bad, like a bad recipe for you're setting yourself up for failure, basically. Like,
Yeah, and when
yeah.
you're young, you do that. I did it, right? We all do it, and then eventually it catches up with you. But so to actually address the underlying shit that's going on there, it's probably going to take a long time, right? Probably.
And a lot of different things, not just one solution, like changing your diet, exercising more, like taking supplements, right? All these different factors, I would imagine.
Exactly. So if I were to sell you a pill, it's not like, even if it was really good at actually helping all the reasons why you maybe are having brain fog, or why you're really experiencing anxiety, it's really important you feel it the first time you take it. Otherwise, you're not going to want to take it anymore. Hey, how was that, Kevin? Shit, I didn't feel anything, right? It's like,
Right.
on to the next thing. But for me, it's really important that even if I get you to feel something that makes you feel better right there, it's actually good for you. And it's actually helping the shit underneath. And the longer you take it, hopefully, it's actually going to help that underlying stuff over time, to the point where it makes you better.
Mm-hmm. Which
right?
is pretty much what we're learning. Of course, I've got to use the word anecdotally, but with cannabinoid therapeutics, specifically CBD, right? We're learning that if you have a high quality product, because there's a lot of snake oil out there, but there is a lot of efficacy from CBD in terms of inflammation, anxiety, just basically cannabinoids serve as homeostasis, right, for your endocannabinoid system. So the more that you can address certain issues that may be lacking with cannabinoids is beneficial to people. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like cannabinoids. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's always a complex recipe. It depends on what you're trying to go after. Cannabinoids are this amazing thing. It looks like we definitely get them from breast milk, right? It looks like we were somehow evolving with them. Somehow, I don't know. I don't think anyone has the answer to that. But the more of it we put within us, everything gets better. It creates homeostasis. Homeostasis is like back to balance or normal. It's badass. It affects almost every system in your body. So continuing on the chemistry of the exploration of nootropics, I asked them, I'm like, okay, what can we do? They're like, nootropics. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, what would you want to go after? What would we want to treat? They're like, well, let's just pick the things that are the biggest selling drug categories, right? The things that make the most sales worldwide for drugs: anxiety, sleep, stress, pain. And let's try and figure out a way to incorporate cannabinoids, right? Like CBD, like you're talking about, with formulas that would help for those things. But instead of it being a pharmaceutical drug, which could work for some people, might not for others, and could actually really fuck people up, it'll actually be good for them. Hopefully, that's the goal, right? So I started investing in the nootropic space and cannabinoids, including weed, 6 years ago, and done a lot of research in, invested more than $1 million into it, and put a bunch of my own money into it, and learned a lot, taken a bunch of products, tried all my samples. It's awesome. And over the years, I've been really working on that in a big way. And I know one of the reasons we were in touch with is because the CEO of another company that I'm a part of called Inner Circle reached out to you. But along the journey of working with it from not the outset by any means, I'm not an OG, like the weed industry and CBD industry has been around for decades, right? But in my last 7 years of being in the industry, it's been a lot of fun. I recognize the products can help a lot of people. But it's a very emergent industry. It's really starting up from scratch. Sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's illegal. And like any industry that's just getting started, you're still trying to figure shit out. You're trying to figure out, like, if I wanted to sell my products online, who do I use to take credit card payments, right? Or, who can I use to build me a website? Or what's the legal way I can do it? Or who can actually make me a product? Or how do I even ship that product? Or, now 7 years later, since I started doing this, a lot of this shit's more normalized.
Right.
But one thing that has really sucked for me in the industry is not knowing who to trust this entire time over 7 years. There's been a lot of people that say that they can do something, but they're just getting in themselves.
Right. We hear that a lot, man. That is, something that's definitely echoed on this podcast is, the bad actors that are at play right now. And a lot of it has to do with, in my opinion, the like non-enforcement of regulation by the government, and then in some cases over-regulation, right? And I feel like it's over-regulation on the THC side, and then when it comes to the hemp side, it's like there's not any enforcement of regulation. So in both cases, it's like the wild west, because with over-regulation, you really perpetuate the illicit market, and then with no enforcement of regulation, it's the wild west. I mean, do you see that?
Yeah. So that you're absolutely right. What you just said, I would refer to that as being more so barriers to the actual industry itself succeeding, right? The bad actors are going to come with any emergent new industry. People are full of shit, right? I can do this thing. They take your money, and maybe they have good intentions, maybe they don't, right?
Right.
And if
I agree, but like with CBD, for instance, like there's no FDA, like it's not FDA approved, right? So it's almost like anybody could just pop up. Like I had somebody on that's in the lab testing space, and he was saying that most of the products that they tested in 2018 from Amazon, I think the majority of them, like 95% came back with no CBD at all in them, like little to no CBD. So
well, they're not lying, because it says hemp on it on Amazon still to this day. Doesn't say even CBD. None of the products he would have bought off Amazon, like,
but they're
just
but they're claiming that there is CBD, and they're claiming that there's cannabinoids.
There could be cannabinoids.
I'll send you the CBS national study that they did.
No, I know. No. I know you're right. But what I'm saying is, because you couldn't legally sell CBD on Amazon, still it can't be labeled CBD. Right. Currently, right now.
Well, I get the labeling issue. I get that. Right. So I guess you're saying that's technically what I'm saying. So, like, they're not claiming that there's CBD. It's a loophole. I get it. But what they're doing is they're buying gummy bears and they're putting them in a package that says hemp, and there's
hemp.
no hemp in it at all either. There's no whole plant at all. So
Yeah,
it's
so that's just people taking advantage of people, and unfortunately that's the kind of shit that exists, right? Like people are always
right.
going to do that. Even with FDA regulation of, let's say, the supplement industry, they can't, there's not too much regulation they can do. They could, unfortunately, it's a huge country, right? You guys have more than 280 million people, right?
Yep.
Pardon me, is it 3? It might even, I don't know if it's 3
I
million or
honestly
2
don't
million. I
know.
feel like,
I think it's close to 3. Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know
we
the
can,
exact number.
I don't have a Jamie like the Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan podcast.
I wish my
I thought for
dog
some
could
reason,
type, because he would be a good sidekick, but all he does is sit on the couch over here. So
pre-COVID, it was 328.2 million. So the point is, there's so many people selling so many products. They usually wait till they hear complaints, like people unfortunately are getting screwed up by something, then they test it, then they warn people. But so yeah, to your point, there's a lot of bad actors. There's a lot of people ripping people off. And so in my experience as an entrepreneur, I had such an epic experience initially where we were saving people's lives, right? Like we were getting them these tubes, and it was, in all fairness, it was really fun. It was, like a real life action
it's
movie. At
rewarding.
one point I was, yeah, I'm smuggling it down at one point. Like I've got my bag loaded. It's still technically illegal. I'm saving people's lives. I knew this shit is real, man. Like this can really save lives. So when I would meet people who are like, oh yeah, I could do that for you, and I'd pay them and they'd fuck off with the money, or, they actually couldn't. And when it was like over and over and over, it can actually get a little disheartening.
Right.
And the legislation thing you brought up, just a nightmare. In California, I had a brief stint of trying to get into the legal products business in California, and the legislation completely cockblocked that market. I didn't have the risk tolerance to go into illegal, but now, many people that tried doing it legally wish they went illegal, because those guys were just, cleaning shop, just making hand over fist money,
Right.
while all the legal people lost all their money. So there's some ridiculous things that are going on for sure. But essentially, I really realized that if I were to do business, I became a member of a group called ArcView. I'm not sure if you've heard of
Sure,
them.
I've heard of them. Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So I was a member of that group for 3 years. I presented on stage. The founders of that group are amazing. You've got Steve D'Angelo, who's an incredible, long-term cannabis OG dude.
Yep, he's been on the
And
podcast.
yeah, he's epic. And Troy, he's an amazing person. But what I realized was Steve was a part of founding it, but obviously was super busy running his own stuff. And so even with ArcView, like they would have people on stage presenting as an expert who had just come into the cannabis industry like 3 weeks prior to, right? Who had no idea what they're talking about. People are learning from them or paying them, and and it's just one scenario like that over again. And I think, unfortunately,
I was gonna say, is that what inspired? Like, because I know when I was looking at Inner Circle's website, like a lot of what you guys talk about and what you want to address is exactly what you're saying now. Is like, the people getting fucked over, the bad actors in the space, and like really being a partner that adds value to entrepreneurs. So was that kind of going through those experiences? Was that kind of the gravitation to become, part of that Inner Circle community?
Yeah, well, that's what had me want to create it, right? So I was essentially, I knew I had made some great friends. Okay, so I knew some people that weren't full of shit, that were fucking epic in different things that they had done. I had to learn the hard way. Okay, like I'd lose I'd lose 40 grand trying to hire someone to make CBD products for me, who said they could do it but really couldn't, right? Or I would lose $30,000 on a credit card retainer, where essentially a reserve, where a merchant company's like, oh yeah, don't worry, we can process your CBD product sales payments, no big deal. I work with them for 2 months, they're gone, they don't exist anymore, and they kept my $30,000 reserve, right? So I learned the hard way, right? I have scars, if you will, to prove that I've learned the hard way. And so I realized for myself in right before the pandemic, Matt, the CEO of Inner Circle, myself and my wife, we launched, remember I was telling you about Nootropics, we launched the world's first CBD nootropic, which is badass. It's incredible. You take one pill. I think it makes me feel great all day long. The effects last 2 days, badass. But I had been doing this for like 7 years. And I realized when I did that, I'm like, man, like this industry is such a drain right now because there's so many bad actors. I call them false prophets, right? that for myself, I thought, man, if I had to do this all over again, if I really wanted to do this, how could I create a community where only people that are 100% legit get let in? And only people that I know, as an example, are actually amazing and super rad at what they do. And if I could create that, how could I create some accountability within that so everyone could do good business with each other? And essentially, I was trying to think about what would it look like so that people could actually succeed and thrive in not only just cannabis, but all of plant medicine, right? Because
Mhm.
now there's a bunch more people getting into mushrooms. There's, there's a lot of stuff's on the rise. I've been microdosing LSD for years. I think it's amazing. I can't wait for that to pop off. And there's going to be so many more, not that LSD is a plant medicine, it's completely synthetic, but the point is there's a lot more psychedelic plant medicines that are going to come down the pipe. And how do we figure out a way in which we can work together, just simply do good business by each other? That's all everyone wants to do. Where we could trust each other. And so Matt and I put our heads together and we invested our own money in creating the Inner Circle. And so the Inner Circle is a private members community. You've got to pay to get in. You have to be interviewed before you're even let in. You have to be approved. Generally, we mostly accept only referrals from other members. And you have to ideally be badass at what you're doing. And that way you get
What
in.
does
So
badass
what's really
mean? What is like what's the criteria specifically? Do you mean like is it revenue? Is it employees hired? Is it do you have to have a business plan? Like what is your definition of badass?
yeah, so you have to actually be good at doing what you say you do, right? For real,
How do you
right?
measure
We
that
have to
though?
we verify it. Like, we talk to other customers, we know of them in the industry. We actually check out their business and understand that they're doing good work. We ask for references, right? A crazy old school
Right.
practice that still works in 2021, right? We really make sure that they're good people. It's You'd be surprised what you could find with a quick Google search. But at the same time, initially, it's really just been word of mouth, person to person. And the first people that I invited were the people that I knew. So like, now I found the best credit card guy, a guy that can actually help you run merchant processing so you can charge people on the credit card for CBD or weed. That guy was coming in. Like the director of LA Normal, he's coming in. A friend of mine that actually makes phenomenal third-party CBD products. So if you want to make your own CBD product line, he's coming in, right? People like that, people that run labs, people that are legit scientists, actually good people at marketing, people that really actually know, because I've worked with them and paid them, how to run ads for your CBD company. A buddy of mine runs the most successful affiliate network for CBD. He had done it for 9 months, 10 months, had driven millions and millions of dollars in revenue for thousands of businesses. That guy's coming in, right? These are the kinds of people that I originally invited. And because I started inviting them, I set some really simple rules, okay, just to keep it easy. I said, you guys should start off by, first and foremost, if ever you have any needs in this industry that you can find another member within the Inner Circle, if they offer it, start by doing business with each other first. Give each other the opportunity to do business with each other. Two, if anyone fucks around, well, if they've made it in the Inner Circle, it's probably not on purpose. Okay. It's possible we could have fucked up and we just let, a false prophet in, or a bad actor, as you called it, but probably it wasn't on purpose. So let's figure out how to make that right, because everyone needs to feel phenomenal when doing business with each other.
Mhm.
And then third, if anyone actually is really fucking around and they're a legitimate bad actor, they are getting banned from the Inner Circle. They're going on a blacklist, a warning list, which I think we put public, just so you know, so that anyone in the industry, the more that they'll learn about Inner Circle, if they want to know who absolutely not to do business with before they're about to pay someone for packaging or for product labeling or for distribution for their weed brand or buying weed for them as a grower, whatever it is, they can go check that list, because if their name's on that list, don't give them your business.
Mhm.
And so we've kind of created this ecosystem, if you will, a circular economy, where it breeds good business. It forces accountability, if I explain that well enough. And at the end of the day, that's all we want. Like, if you've got a business and you want to succeed with it, you want to get the best resources as fast as possible with the least amount of money that are going to actually work, so you can actually get out there and get the shit done you need.
Yeah, I mean it's something that's so needed, especially in this burgeoning industry right now. I mean, to your point and what we've previously discussed, there's there's the false prophets, the bad actors, but then there's also like all of the regulatory compliance and the red tape and the ever evolving legislation that's changing. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it's good to have not only a trusted partner, but actual partner that really has had experience doing what they're doing and has the expertise to get it done. And it sounds like, obviously, Erai, from your experience starting in Brazil and then expanding into now the US, you've really built that street cred, or that portfolio of proven success. So how, if someone was listening and they wanted to learn more about joining the inner circle, I know you mentioned there's a membership fee, but like what would be one of their first steps? Where could they find y'all online, website, social media to learn more?
Yeah, so you guys can go check us out, innercircle.biz, biz, and you can watch the trailer, read about it. You can apply to become a member if you want. And in all fairness, though, there's a barrier to entry for the annual membership fee. So we've set the barrier pretty high so that people that actually invest to get into this community are going to take it seriously. It helps us eliminate people that aren't yet currently, people that are really walking their talk, right? And you can apply right then and there. You schedule an appointment. You'll have someone that meets with you. They'll find out who you are. Now, don't get me wrong, too. If you're just starting or you want to start in the industry as well, we're not excluding people. You don't only have to be an entrepreneur that's doing more than $1 million a year, as an example. You can actually, if you're a startup entrepreneur, or you're someone that's coming in from another industry, you can also join the inner circle and learn. And we're really clear about the members that are just coming into the industry from the beginning. But yeah, it's super rad. Like we really, it's my opportunity to create my own community. So I love the plant. I want to have a lot of fun. This is a plant where half this industry gets people high. That sounds amazing to me, right? You should be able to have fun and hang out with people that you really enjoy being around. So we have weekly masterminds where we get together, and essentially you can hop on a Zoom with some of your fellow members and you can genuinely help each other out, right? So if someone's like, hey, I need this, then, this member might already have a solution for that. I go and I talk to some of the coolest people in the industry from all over the world. If we want to learn about anything specifically, we do a private interview just for the inner circle with them. It's kind of cool. It's like having our own little private club. And at some point, we're actually planning on this year doing our first physical retreat down here in Costa Rica. So it's rad. Like if you think you want to succeed in, now it's actually branched out, Kevin. It started just as weed in the canna industry, CBD and weed. Now we're getting a lot more plant medicine entrepreneurs, and people wanting to get into the mushroom space. So we've fully encrypted everything, and we're on private servers, and people can talk about whatever they want within the inner circle. It's not up to me to be, overseeing their conversations or getting into their business. It's a safe place where they can meet other people that are participating in the industries that they're in, the plant medicine industries, communicate, do business, get done what they need to get done. But either way, I think it's a good investment of money. I think people can have a lot of fun. They can make good friends. And these kinds of things, like I've been in these sorts of things in other industries. It just didn't really exist. Like ArcView tried their best. It just wasn't a good fit for me. I love Troy. I love Steve. I love the original founders, but it wasn't the best use of my investment dollars any longer. And so I'm stoked we came up with this one.
Awesome, man. Yeah, no, community is so important. And the more that you can knowledge share and share best practices and talk about your experiences, your failures, learning, successes, I mean, it only helps that business owner, that individual, that entrepreneur, or even that team grow. So the fact that you're trying to bring the best and the brightest minds together in the inner circle, man, that's quite a feat, and I commend you for that. And so we'll definitely include the links in the YouTube box description so that they have it and they can click on your website to learn more. So I really appreciate your time, Erai, and yeah, man, best of luck to you in growing the inner circle. It's exciting stuff.
I appreciate it, Kevin, and thanks for having me on your podcast. And best of luck with it. Seems like you're doing a great job. You've had some amazing guests on, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes. And thank you all for listening. Bye.